Welcome to the Lair, a place where interesting people you may know tell you things you didn't. So grab a chair and your favorite vice and get comfortable. There are no rules in the Lair, but there is Laura Babcock. You know her from TV, and she is not into media monogamy. Let's find out who else is in the Lair.
So we're in the Lair, of course, and there's somebody who wants to start the show a special way, so I'm going to let them. Jasper, the mic is yours. Let's hear it. Come on. Do your best De Niro or whatever that was.
De Niro?
Don't point at him. You look like De Niro tonight. Do
Like
your boxing thing or whatever that was.
I'm just going to say to you, just tell all your friends out there that if you can't get it on, you're going to have to get it on. Get it on. Let's go. Move it along.
What was that?
He says that in court sometimes too.
Welcome
Good
to the
thing
Lair.
he's with the crown.
That was the strangest opening.
Is it still too late to back out?
Yeah, no, you're stuck here now, Susan. You can't leave. That's the voice. If you don't recognize her voice, because you probably know her most from print, it's Susan Clairmont. Although you do TV shows and you do other things, and we're happy to have you here in the Lair.
Thank you.
We've never had an open where somebody said whatever that was that Jasper just said. I'm not quite sure what we're supposed to do. But we're privileged to have you here, not just because I'm a fan of your work and I've known you for a while, but because you just won the top columnist in Canada, right?
I did, yes.
Very nice. What's with the little tiny clap, Lauren?
I already congratulated Susan.
Oh, I don't want to hear about your private congratulations. We were having a
I'm
group
sorry.
applause. There you go.
Thank you, Lauren.
So how did you feel? It's a big deal.
Oh, it is a big deal. It was huge for a whole bunch of different reasons. I had been nominated a couple of times before and did not win. So to be there and to be honored by colleagues from all across the country and to beat two columnists from the Globe and Mail, that was pretty sweet, I have to say.
What were the two columnists?
They're both business writers, and one is based in Rome and writes about the European economy, and the other one is in Ottawa writing about national finances. And,
If I
and then there
may,
was me.
You didn't win an award against B-level papers. It was everybody.
You're such
No. I didn't mean it like that. I mean,
So the way it works is it's columnists, all newspaper
the spec
columnists
is
from
up against
Canada.
St. Catharines and London.
Oh
not
no,
Toronto.
this is the Globe and Mail and
Oh
the
shit!
Toronto
Then
Star.
I take it back. I give you way more applause.
Yeah, applaud again.
Yeah,
You can
no,
applaud
that's
some more.
different.
like applaud loudly. This person
I'm
just
sorry.
won
Then
nationally.
my applause.
And you know
was
what?
inadequate.
Given it's the year of the Euro crisis and austerity and everything, the fact that you won against those with crime stories from our area,
From
pretty
here,
impressive.
Yeah.
Pretty impressive.
And you know, it was also really nice because you know, it brings extra attention to the stories that I won for. So, for instance, one of them was a column that I did about Ray and Lillian, a couple who had been married for 70 years.
Made me cry. I was reading it in the drive-through one morning.
Who
Made
were
me cry.
placed in separate nursing homes, right? And it raised so many issues about the way we care for seniors in our society and the way the way nursing homes work and all of those issues. And now it has a national spotlight.
And they got back together. Like they were moved back together.
yeah,
How
they-
happy were you to see that?
Oh my God!
And was it because of your column?
No one is saying so. The family thinks that my
Yeah.
column had something to do with it. I don't know that for certain, but
But it was, you know, Suzanne, I keep saying Suzanne, it's Susan, right?
Susan,
Susan,
yeah.
you had we were talking about you on the O Show last week when you won the award in our Way to Go segment, and that's when I tweeted you to come on on the Laircast because I've been a fan of your work, and I don't say that easily. You know, there's only a couple
That's
of
very
columnists
sweet.
that I
Thank
make
you.
a point of reading. But with that particular story, I can see why that put you in contention because I had never really thought about the plight of older adults when they go to a nursing home. I would have assumed they got an apartment together or they got space together. So, you know, I'm only 14 years into my marriage, but you get married to be with someone to the end. And the thought that just because you have to get care, suddenly you're separated seems unhealthy and seems fundamentally unfair.
Absolutely.
But I'd never known about it until you wrote that article. So you must get tremendous gratification from your work when there's a result from what you expose.
Absolutely. When you can, I feel very privileged that I have the platform that I have to bring attention to issues that I care about,
Yeah.
to sometimes motivate people to get involved and to speak up and to write letters and to work towards change.
Well, you weren't nominated for this next column, but we certainly talked about it on the show, which was the girls of Charlton House.
Yes.
You know, I had, the first time we brought it up on the O show, Lauren and I kind of batted it back and forth. Neither of us were an expert on that particular bylaw. We didn't really understand radial separation, but it was like, well, if it's on the books and it's fair, who are we to say? When you saw what council did, and we've got a councillor in the room, so defend yourself at any point, Terry, if you feel the need.
need to. He's
Well,
complete.
yeah, he was on
Terry's
your
in
side of it.
completely cahoots
Terry
with
and I are
Susan
on
on
the
this.
same
All right,
page
Yeah.
on this
so
one. Yeah.
BFFs on this issue. But any other point you need to defend yourself, go ahead. It'll come up. It'll come up.
That's coming.
Fight.
So, well, watch out. Jasper's a boxer here, so, you know, be careful. Don't start a fight. But you brought up the girls. The way that you said, what I loved about it was you said, we invited council to come and meet these girls during this decision about what to do about their request to move their housing. And they didn't take the invitation. And so you said, I'm bringing the girls to council through this article, through this column into the city. And that was powerful. And I felt it changed my viewpoint, which I expressed on the show. But I've seen the letters to the paper in the last couple of days.
The response has been enormous. Not only the letters to the editor, but the responses that I've personally had from readers. Some of them, and I was talking to Terry about this earlier. I've had girls who lived in the hall who have contacted me, who are now, you know, wives and mothers and teachers and businesswomen, and, you know, who have these fabulous lives, and they say that they owe that to Charlton Hall. I've had contact with moms and dads whose girls are in Charlton Hall right now, who talk about the pain that they're feeling and that their children are feeling, listening to this city debate whether these girls are worthy or not, whether these girls have a place in our city.
Is that really fair, though? I don't think that any of the debate was around that.
I think it is. I think when community members call the girls undesirables,
So let me challenge
I
you
think
on
that
that.
raises
they
questions.
didn't call the girls undesirable. They called the group home undesirable in terms of it affecting
Yeah, but
property
let me
value.
just
That's
challenge
not the
Susan on
same.
that.
I think that's not. I think
It's
that's
not
not
the sa-
accurate. I think at one of the meetings that I was at, there was
They
a
called the
community
girls-
member who stood up and said that she did not want undesirables living in her neighborhood.
So, Susan, I said
And these
that on-
girls, I'm sorry,
Yeah, go ahead.
these girls are old enough that they're
read the paper and
listening
get
to
this,
this.
yes.
They know exactly what's going on around them and around Charlton Hall.
So we said, and there's the O show there, you can see she's Lauren and I yapping. But I said on the O show that, I said the tag or the graphic, the key was undesirables. I put that right in there. And I since got challenged on Facebook. Where are you getting this other than Susan Clairmont's comment or column? What evidence does she have that this was said? To Lauren's point.
It was on a live stream as well that the Hamilton Spectator did.
So what makes you care so much about these girls?
Well, as I said right up front in the column, I have a huge, personal interest because I was a member of the Charlton Hall Board of Directors for 7 years and was the vice chair for quite a bit of that time.
So how did you get involved with it in the first place?
I was actually asked to join by a police officer. There were, when I was on the board, there were 3 Hamilton police officers, all fairly high-ranking officers, actually, who were also on the board. So, when I hear members of the public talk about police cars outside Charlton Hall and all the mischief that the girls are up
That's
to,
for the
and
board meetings?
3 police officers on the board. I mean,
funny.
and not to say
That is
that
funny.
that police weren't there for other reasons as well. We were part of the, beat officers would drop by and check in and have a cookie and say hello, and as a good beat officer would.
Is this a case where ignorance is causing ignorance, and I don't mean it in the pejorative way entirely. I just mean they're not aware of who these girls are and how they live,
Absolutely.
and they make
Absolutely.
assumptions based on, as we all do, on what we think we know.
Absolutely.
So you sound as though you have you're passionately committed to the cause of these girls. When you were a teenager, did you face any challenges? How do you empathize so much with them?
No, I never had an experience like that myself as a teenager, but anyone who reads my column knows that these are the girls that I write about all the time. I write about these sorts of girls. I write about the families that they sometimes come from. With many of these girls come from a history of abuse. I'll give you an example. There's lots of confidentiality issues when you sit on a board like Charlton Hall.
Yeah.
So even though I, was there a lot and met a lot of the girls, I didn't always know the whole background of each girl. And so I was once told by the executive director that a murder victim I had just written about, a woman who had been murdered, that I actually knew her daughter because she was a girl at the hall. And I hadn't realized that at the time that I wrote the column. So these girls have a lot of challenges, and the biggest one, and the common denominator being that they all face some kind of a mental health
Susan,
issue.
these are local girls? Because sometimes within the group home world, they bring you to a different community. These are Hamilton girls?
These are Hamilton girls. These are Hamilton girls.
What
Yeah.
got you reporting on crime? Because I think of a crime reporter stereotypically as being like a grizzly old guy.
I'm
who's had, like,
thinking Paul Morse
yeah,
for an
yeah.
image.
I'm thinking more like a Lord
And I've
Lieberman.
worked with a lot of those guys over the years. Yes.
Yeah, I'm
You're
thinking
no
that.
Paul
I'm thinking
Morse.
that, right? You're petite, you're blonde, you're beautiful. You don't come across. You seem like you should be on television or a different beat than crime.
You don't look like you write.
You don't look like you write. It's true. She doesn't even look like her profile picture, although it's getting better. Her Twitter one is better. For years, I was like, change the profile pic, Susan. You're better looking than that. But how did you get immersed in crime? Because you don't just write about it like somebody on a beat. Your columns take you inside the heart of darkness, if you will. I mean, did everybody here read that Pure Evil? Who here read that in the spec? I pride myself on having a steel stomach and on lived a few things. I couldn't get past the point where it was talking about what he did to that little boy. Like, I was sick about it. And I wanted to finish your column because I respect you and I knew that it was important, and you talked about how the victims wanted their story to be told. But, like, honestly, Susan, I couldn't get through it. And I thought, how does someone like Susan Clairmont get into the head of this monster and put it on the paper in a way that some people didn't even think should be in the newspaper? It was so graphic.
Yeah, that one was very controversial. That was about a guy named James Cooper who was, at the time that he was convicted, he was considered Canada's worst child molester. And he lived right here in Hamilton.
And we didn't know about it until your column that he's getting released.
That's right.
Which made me want to, like, find him and take him out. And I say that as a new mom, right? So how did you get into that?
It's I've been a crime reporter my whole career. I always say that when you start out as a journalist at a daily newspaper, the first beat you always have is the crime beat. And the reason for it is because the hours are crappy, shitty, crappy. What can I say on here? I don't know. The hours are shitty. You work lots of nights. I worked every New Year's Eve for probably 10 years. I mean, because that's when stuff happens, right? So most young reporters do their time on the crime beat and can't wait to get off it. And I loved it. And I was the only woman. I started out at the Peterborough Examiner, and I was the only woman in the newsroom. And I worked with all the grizzly old guys who were wonderful, but they
I don't think wonderful means what she thinks it means.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
They taught me so much, but I sort of was learning in this atmosphere where I thought that you had to be tough as nails, right? I thought that I took pride in how many pickups I could do, and a pickup is,
Thanks for clarifying, because Lauren was going to a bad place.
knock on the door. A pickup is when you knock on the door and say, hi, I know that your daughter was killed in a car
my
accident
God.
3 hours ago, but I'd like to speak to you, and I'm wondering if I could pick up a photo of her that we can
Oh
run
my
in the
God.
paper. So that's something that we do as crime reporters.
You came to the Spectator as a columnist, though, yes?
No, I came as a police reporter. And
So why did you
became
love
a-
it? Because that sounds like the worst job in the world.
I'm really confused. There was a huge campaign on Susan Clairmont.
I
You were
had already been
a
there
spec
for a
reporter?
while. Yeah,
Really,
for
eh?
a year or so, until I was made a
Weird. Do you
columnist.
remember the
I
campaign?
don't. What was this?
There was a
picture of my
huge
face, yeah.
Susan is coming, our new columnist. And you were already here?
I got hired as a weekend and night cop reporter.
Weird.
So, but,
Yeah.
okay, so
Yeah.
I just want to understand this. You've described the worst thing in the world, which is, I mean, I sucked as a news reporter because if something bad happened, I was covering a boat race once and a guy got in an accident, and my producer's like, go interview him, get the story, and I'm like, I can't. His family's crying. Like, how do you do the pickup? How do you do that?
You know, so I thought at first that you just had to be tough and that you know, I could do 3 in a day and it didn't bother me and whatever. But the longer I did it and the older I got, I suppose, the more I realized that, you know, this stuff is sad.
Yeah.
When you sit at someone's kitchen table and the police have just left because they've just been notified that someone has died, it's sad. And it's okay to feel sad about that as
Doesn't
the
that take a
reporter.
tremendous toll on you?
You know, during I just finished covering a long murder trial, the Baby Cohen
Yeah,
murder
sorry.
trial that went on for 6 weeks, I think. And during the course of that trial, this was a 6-week-old baby who was murdered, and I was there every day.
That's when the mom was in the kitchen and the father was out and there was a bang or something in the living room, that story?
Yeah.
Okay.
So the dad was the one being tried for murder, although the mom was painted as the alternate suspect by the defense counsel. And, you know, I sat through autopsy photos of that baby, the 6-week-old
And you've got young
baby.
kids, right?
And I have children. And I had lots and lots of emails from readers and tweets from people who follow me on Twitter who were genuinely concerned about my mental well-being, who
because of
wondering
the
how you asking me that question. You know, are you okay? I'm reading your columns. I'm worried about you. I mean, it's kind beyond belief that readers feel they have this connection with me, but worried that I would lose my mind covering this trial. And yeah, it can be really hard sometimes.
So if you internalize it and you feel the empathy, which is something that maybe the grizzled old people didn't do, the sort of the quintessential crime reporter who kind of is oblivious to it all and has a big scotch at the end of the day, you said to yourself, I can feel this.
I still have the
Yeah,
scotch at the end of the day. Yeah.
But we have scotch on the bar over there on the wall. You don't have to stick with beer, Susan. But I mean, you said to yourself, it's okay to internalize it. It's okay to feel this stuff. And that was my thing with the pure evil thing, right? Is to comb through the stuff this guy did, and to create for us a chronological narrative of his abuse of his fostered or his adopted children. You know, it wasn't readable for you to have been 10 levels deeper to source it and write it.
That one, yeah, it had its moments. I mean, and I think a lot of the stories that I really kind of get submersed in do that to me. I remember I spent weeks, months actually, working on the James Cooper story, and I remember one particular day sitting at my desk in the newsroom, and I was reading court transcripts, the testimony of one of the girls that he had molested. And she was, at the time that she was molested, she was 10, which is the same age as my daughter. And yeah, there was a point that day where I just said, I can't take this anymore. And I got up and left and went out for a walk and stepped away from it for a little while.
What's interesting to me, though, is that I've described him without using his name. I've called him a monster. I've called him a number of other things. You keep referring to him by his given name. You humanize people in a way that even when, I mean, but you should. I mean, because they are human beings,
it's
right?
humanizing, but it's also, I want everybody out there to know who he is and what he did, right? It's putting a name. Yeah, it's his name is James Cooper, and he's going to get out again. And we need to know that. We need to be aware of what he's done and what
Do
he's
you worry
capable
about
of doing.
vigilante reaction to something like that? I mean, did you get emails in addition to sympathy? Did you get emails of what's his release date and where is he located? Because I'm going to be there.
Well, there's certainly that issue with some of his victims and they've been very honest in interviews with me about having thoughts of revenge.
Yeah.
But
But even your readers, to protect our own children from this guy, you know.
no, when he's released, he won't be released into Hamilton. He won't be coming back here. So.
So, you know, you weren't nominated for the James Cooper story wasn't part of the contention. I don't know if it was before the cutoff or not.
That's right. Yeah,
it's a couple of the other stories
You
that
didn't
got
win
you.
for a story, you won for you?
She went
I
for a
won
couple
for
of columns, right?
a portfolio of 3 different columns. So one of them was the story about the couple in the nursing home. Another one was a piece I did about a Hamilton police officer named Roy Jones, who committed suicide on duty with his service revolver. And that story, one of the things I try to do as a columnist is I want to tell the story about specific people, about individual people. So it was very much the story about Constable Jones, but it was also about the bigger issue of policing and suicide and mental health and the pressures and stresses that police officers face. What support do they have? I mean, police officers, you know, and this is, I've been writing about police officers for 20 years. I mean, police officers are expected by society and by themselves, I think, to be warriors, to be...
Sorry, but how old are you?
How old am
You've been
I?
writing about cops for 20 years?
I'm 43.
Wow.
Yeah.
I thought she was writing about cops in, like, kindergarten.
Yeah, I don't know. Like, grade 5 is my first job.
But go on.
So,
go ahead.
trying to bring context to all of these stories that I tell, right? So Ray and Lillian, it's not just about Ray and Lillian being separated. It's about all the other Rays and Lillians.
So
who
there's
are
a social
separated.
responsibility that's intrinsic through your writing, but how do you straddle the divide between journalist and columnist? Because to me this is fascinating. Your contemporary who does politics is constantly in the line of fire for when he is more columny than journally. Where is, you know, what quote is legit?
referring
Talking about
to?
Andrew, right?
Oh.
Like you always hear the complaints of, well, is it a journalistic interview? Is it going to turn into an opinion piece? How are you dealing with crime? What do you think a journalist's role is versus a columnist's role?
Well, it's, you know, I'm always, there are different kinds of columnists, right? There's the columnists who write about their own lives. I mean, who are really very personal. Someone like Cheryl Nadler, right? We all know what, you know,
And the
TV
guy
show
on
Cheryl
Saturdays.
Nadler watched or who she's dating or whatever, right?
What's that guy on Saturdays who makes me laugh till I cry, Rob?
Jeff Mahoney.
No, Benedetti.
Oh,
Benedetti.
Paul Benedetti,
That's-
yeah.
you know what?
Yeah, I mean, great writers, right?
Cry my
But
eyes
but they're
out, it's so
not
funny.
they're not doing interviews. They're not doing research. They're writing about themselves essentially, and so that's not what I do. I'm also not. Some columnists take the reporting that other people do and then interpret it and columnize on that.
And
you
Andrew
know?
does a lot of that.
Andrew does a
Yes.
lot of that, yes. You know, Emma Riley will report on something that happens
Yeah.
at City Council, and then Andrew will take her reporting and analyze it and analyze the issues that she's reporting about and
And maybe
put
get a
his spin
scoop or
on
two
it.
on the side, right?
And
Terry?
his, yeah. and Andrew's
Okay, I
good
know
at that,
Sam's the leak. Sorry.
but my columns are virtually always reporting. I'm always doing interviews. I'm
So
often.
so as a reporter who's sourcing interviews and doing the research, why are you then a columnist? Where does your opinion? I think of columnists as being people who opine on the fact.
Well,
Where
I
does your opinion
do,
come
although
in?
it might be more subtle than that. You know, I think in everything I write, when you finish it, you know where I stand on the issue.
Well, especially with the Girls of Charlton, because you declared, this is my opinion.
Right.
This is my vested interest. But with other columns, I wouldn't necessarily know that you're
Well,
opining
let's
on it.
take the James Cooper one, for instance, which is a bit unusual because it was much, much longer than
Yeah, it was
my
huge,
normal
yeah.
columns, right? It was a very, very long piece. But at the same time, I'm doing all kinds of things in there that a reporter who needs to be objective wouldn't be doing. And nowhere in there do I, and I'd have to go back and look at it. I doubt that there's anywhere in there that I overtly said what I think of him and what should happen to him, and
You advocated a
Now's
what
your
I think I
chance.
say, but it's in there. It's when you read it, you know exactly where I'm coming
You made
from.
us hate him.
I'm guiding people. I'm guiding
Well, you
readers
can't-
towards
you didn't make us
a
hate
goal.
him. You laid out his systematic, strategic, horrific evil, hence the pure evil title. But you did say in there at one point, his victims want to be heard. So it was clear you're on the side of his victims. But so now that you've got this award, which I don't think, has anyone in the spec ever won the National Columnist Award before?
No,
So now that you have it, how long till you're in Toronto?
I have no plans to move to Toronto or to
But
work
if
in
the
Toronto.
offer comes a dangling, and the audience comes a
maybe
dangling,
someday in my life, but as I said earlier, I mean, this is Hamilton's home. I'm a transplant here. I've lived here.
where are you from?
From Peterborough.
Okay, you said, but prior to that, you grew up in Peterborough?
Yeah, I'm
So
from
Hamilton's the big city.
Hamilton. Yeah, when I came here, Hamilton was huge. When I'd worked for a number of years in Peterborough before I came here. And, starting out as a police reporter at the Hamilton Spectator, one of the first assignments I had was I went out and did a ride along with the police on a Saturday night with Vice and Drugs to do a John sweep, where they, used a female officer as a decoy and put her out at, where were we? I think we were at King and Emerald.
Right?
Jerseyville Road.
We were at King and
Barton and Oak.
King and Emerald.
Someone
And
the other day without her skirt on at high noon at what was it, Easton, Maine.
and that was a big eye opener for me because I wasn't seeing a lot of that in
So
Peterborough.
I still don't get the appeal for a small town girl to decide at 20, I'm going to dedicate my life to, people with serious issues and covering that and the beat that everyone hates and I'll never have a New Year's Eve. And how do you get to that
Because
place?
for me, the beat is, it's not so much about chasing the bad guys, although I do love that part of it as well. And it's not so much the going out to a crime scene in the middle of the night, although I love that too. To me, what I
We should have
focus
pulled her over from
on,
the bar when what was that, a 1016 going down outside our
Yeah,
Lair?
there was a ton of cops
There was a
and-
ton of cops, someone
Was
getting...
there? Yeah, I would've been
and
out
here,
there like
and
a
here you've got the
shot.
top crime reporter in the country sitting there, and Lauren calls me over. You should have called over her. It could have been her call-up. So we're hanging out the window going, what's a 1016? We should ask Susan. Well, I mean, we're just weirdos, but why do you want to do this 24/7? It seems to me to be depressing.
because for me, it's about the victims, right?
Okay.
It's the victims don't have a voice, and that's something that I can do for them, is
So
to
if
give
you're
them a
given-
voice.
And I don't want to get you in trouble with your current employers, but maybe this will work for you. So given that you care most about the victims and that there are much bigger voice opportunities, AKA newspapers with bigger readerships, with more influence, and you've got the credentials now to go there, isn't that sort of the next step in terms of victims advocacy, is to write in the big leagues?
I don't know. I mean, to me, one of the things that was so nice about winning a National Newspaper Award is to know that I can do that right here in Hamilton.
You can be the best from a B-level paper. That's amazing.
No,
but
salt on the spec.
That's not a shot at the spec.
Paper, from a smaller paper. And I can. I went. I was competing
You're not
with
wrong. You're just not nice.
I was competing with Christy Blatchford and Rosa
who's an
DiMano and
awesome
whoever
columnist.
else,
I've heard of
right?
them.
And so I can do all the. I can write about national issues from here.
Susan, I'm not eloquent enough to make this point, but if you can let me inch along on this.
Okay.
The Charlton Hall thing translates back to the James Cooper thing in terms of a neighborhood's objection is that when a home becomes that level of zoning, you can end up with 7 lovely girls who are going through some issues, or a halfway house for the criminally insane. True? I know it's true. Right? Isn't that the point?
I'm not. So, people, again, I've written many columns about 94 York Boulevard, which is the federal halfway
Yes.
house that has, a guy walked out of there, walked across the
Into the
street
mall.
to the mall, and almost stabbed a woman to death as she was opening her shop.
But within the city of Hamilton, those two, Charlton Hall and York Street, are the same thing.
And that's the problem with radial separation, is that they are all lumped together, and they are not the same. They're not the same at all. I've written many, many times, I don't want 94 York Boulevard in downtown Hamilton. I want it moved. I want it out of Hamilton.
Okay, so my actual question and issue with what you wrote is, the issue should not be about advocating for those girls. It should be about rewriting the law and separating those girls from those psychopaths on York Street, that they're all in the same pile. And it's not about making an exception. It should be about throwing the law out and finding the right bylaw.
I absolutely agree. I agree. But
How empowered now do you feel as the sort of columnist advocate? You know, do you feel like you should put a cape on when you show up at work? Or?
no, my colleagues keep me pretty humble. and the Ontario Newspaper Awards were just this past weekend, and I did not win.
Well, who
so
cares? You
there
won the
go.
national, so
So,
what difference does it make? Maybe they already knew you had the other one.
Do you get high fives or scowly spits when...
No, you know what?
From your
So
colleagues.
let's go through the newsroom. What does Ken Peters do? Yeah,
you walk by, yeah.
probably.
We know
It's a good
Ken.
thing that there's not a camera in the
Fair enough.
there.
Thank
yeah,
you,
that was
Ken.
rude. Sorry, Ken.
I'm keeping
Probably
quiet.
true. but rude.
No, my colleagues, you know what? I work with terrific people. When I was at the NNAs, I was there with a table full of people from The Spectator who couldn't have been happier, and
what was
that was so nice.
What was the moment, if I can, Susan, in your career as a crime reporter where you actually thought, and you mentioned the 10-year-old moment with the 10-year-old girl and your daughter, but was there a moment, a defining moment in your career where you were like, I'm not sure, even with my empathy and even with my interest, that I can stomach this beat any longer?
Yeah. I think the toughest one for me to cover was, and I've written about this case many, many times, and I usually can't talk about it without crying. So,
There's no cameras in the Lair,
was the case in Brantford of Jared Osadash. Jared was 8 years old when he was sent on a court-ordered visit with his father. His mom and dad were separated because Andrew Osadash had beaten the hell out of Jared's mother and had been convicted. And despite that criminal record, in its wisdom, the family court ordered this little boy to have unsupervised visits with his father, and he went on one of those visits, and his father stabbed him to death. And then Andrew Osadash, who was covered in his son's blood, drove across town to Jared's mom's house and held a knife to her throat for several hours until the Brantford police broke into the house and shot him to death and saved her life. And I covered that case from the time that Jared was killed, through his funeral, through the coroner's inquest, through I was at Queen's Park and sat with Jared's mom, whose name is Julie Craven. I sat next to her. She invited me to be with her at Queen's Park when a law was passed named Jared's Law in his memory, which makes it mandatory for there to be a coroner's inquest anytime a child is killed on a court-ordered visit. So I feel very proud of my coverage of that story because I think maybe I had a bit of a hand to play in the passing of the law and her getting the inquest, because for a long time there wasn't going to be one, and the awareness that it brought to the way criminal court works and family court and the relationship between the two. But at the same time, that was the most emotionally draining story I have ever worked on. Partly because Julie herself, who, we have a very strong relationship. We've known each other a long time now. And so I'm not saying anything that I haven't written about before, but Julie suffers from severe post-traumatic stress disorder, which is no surprise given what she went through. And Julie had very few people in the world, I think, that she felt she could turn to, and I was one of them. And so our relationship was crossing a lot of boundaries. It was, for me, it was still professional. For her, it had become more than that. She thought of me as a friend. She talked a lot about committing suicide, about not having anything left to live for. I was very concerned about her. Every time she talks about that night, when you have PTSD, you don't just rethink it. You actually relive it as though you're there. So every time she would talk to me about it, it was just horrible. I mean, she was absolutely distraught and hysterical, and I would watch her go through this time and time and time again. And there got to a point where I thought, I can't do this anymore. And to a point where, I'd see her number come up on my phone, and I would just think, oh, I don't know if I can handle this today. Which all sounds very selfish, and that was part of the problem.
No,
was
Susan,
I thought
it doesn't sound selfish. It sounds like an incredibly stressful job that you have.
but I
Do you
mean, it should
regret-
never be about me.
But
It
do you-
should
but-
always be about.
But, I mean, do you regret
victim.
that boundary was crossed? That reliance, that codependency happened?
No, I think though that I learned how to deal with those sorts of relationships much better. There are other victims who I've become close to as well, who, but I know my own limits now.
Yeah, you've learned.
I've learned, and
So-
and I should say that Julie's doing very, very well, and that was huge for me too, because there were a few years there where I really wondered if she would survive, and she's not only survived, but she's doing all kinds of advocacy work. There is something called Jared's Place in Hamilton, which is a resource center for women who are going through family and criminal court matters involving kids, and so she's done remarkable things.
You do remarkable things, and your passion and her engagement in her job is. I see why you won the award. I can see it in
Thanks,
your
Laura.
writing.
Thank you.
It's exhausting to listen to because, like, day in and day out, you're facing stuff that the rest of us read only at our whim. We don't have to engage ourselves in it. We can put the paper down, but you have these people who believe that you believe in them, and they call you for years, and you're engaged. It's tremendous to listen to,
I
Susan.
call Dreschel when I'm suicidal.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, you Dressel's your go-to columnist. I know.
I don't mean to make light of that.
We could get into them, but that's what you do. That's why you're in the Baba Booey chair.
Thank you.
You're playing your Baba Booey role well.
Way to go, Lauren.
Andrew,
Yeah.
I'm not feeling too.
You know, and it got a little too intimate for Lauren. It got a little too, when it gets below the surface of sarcasm, Lauren gets
Yeah,
silly.
I get a little oogie.
We had another interview.
too
in here-
grown up, I
No,
think.
it is.
Yeah.
It is totally. We had an interview in here once with a woman from Momstown, and we started talking about the role of mothers and women, and Lauren was crawling out of his skin. And he went for more beers that interview. I'm like, you're gonna make it through this, right? But you know what? You stick
Shallow
it through.
now.
No, but she sticks it through. You stick it through when the rest of
little
us would be running
ghoulish,
for the
though.
hills.
It is.
We would at least be alcoholics or drug addicts. It's very, very intense.
It's not for everybody.
It's
that's,
not.
That's for sure. My husband doesn't read what I write. He can't take it.
But you've got kids, and you're an effervescent, happy person.
I
and-
am. Thank you for saying that. So all those readers who think that I'm,
Dress all in black and cry all
yeah,
day.
that I'm
depressed
some
as
morose
Andrew.
person. I'm really not. I'm really
No,
not.
you don't
I'm
come across like that
a
at all.
pretty
And-
stable, happy girl, I think. Most days.
Well, we'll see after you drink a few more how stable you are. But you know what, Susan? I think maybe you've answered that question, right? Is that rather than resist how you were feeling, you embrace it, you experience it, you put it back where it belongs, which is an amazing skill. And I think that's why you're being recognized for it. But that's probably why you're as healthy and happy as you are, is that you don't pretend that your work doesn't affect you and then end up at the end of the night self-destructively. You kind of feel it. The families, the victims know you feel it. We know you feel it. That's why we read you. And then, at the end of the day, somehow you have the strength to carry on and leave us with what we need to be left with, which is amazing. and I'm so glad we had this conversation.
Thanks, Laura.
You know, you're awesome to talk to and very impressive. Thank you, Susan. Susan
Thank
Clairmont.
you.
Awesome.
Thanks.
And when she leaves for Toronto in the next 12 months, we told you so. I just have to put that, I don't know what the spec's going to pay her now that she's,
No, it's more about a book deal and getting the right speaking engagement agent.
and getting a
well,
whole
you're on it.
section in Saturday's paper. Yeah.
She makes good coin.
Well,
Yeah.
there you go. There you go.
does.
Well,
Yep.
you know what? Here's to your career. You're awesome. We don't want to lose you, but I'm not going to begrudge if you move ahead. What's that?
She's a little harsh.
Christy's not quite Susan. They have a different aura.
We do.
You have a different ambiance. Thank you, and thanks for surviving the Laircast.
Thanks, Laura.
Chats in the Lair is a Power Group production. Visit us at powergroup.ca or laircast.com, or check us out on Facebook and follow us on Twitter.